Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Hot and Heavy, the Elaine Bennis podcast. I'm still your host, Shivani Desai, but this is a special episode because I had the wonderful opportunity to speak to Lucy Rivers, who is a postgraduate researcher in television sitcom at Edge Hill University in the UK. Now, Lucy and I had a wonderful conversation about the couch episode. So in the show description, you might have seen that's what we're discussing. Now, I originally thought, I'll include my interview with Lucy on my episode covering the couch. Well, after recording with Lucy and just how wonderful and rich and deep our conversation was, I felt it was a disservice to pare it down to just what was relevant to the episode of Seinfeld, The Couch. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to just release this as a standalone episode because it deserves to be released as that. And what I mean by that is Lucy and I had such a fantastic discussion that went in a lot of different directions, because we get into different characters, different sitcoms, a lot of conversations that just naturally came about and topics that I just didn't want to edit out because I thought it was such a fantastic conversation. And Lucy has, oh my gosh, just such insightful things to say about a number of topics that came about, naturally talking about sitcoms, but as we sitcom nerds do, we can't help but, go into other shows and characters and things that remind us of something else. And, so that's what we ended up doing. And I thought, no, I can't just pare this down and include it in the couch episode and cut out so much of the wonderful conversation that happened. So that's what you're going to be hearing in this episode, our full conversation that was based on a conversation about the couch, but, just beautifully splintered off in so many different ways and directions. And I really hope you enjoy it. I do want to give a little bit more background on Lucy. She achieved both her master's and bachelor's in film and television from the University of East Anglia. God, I hope I'm saying that right, in the UK. Her PhD thesis explores the representation of mental illness in contemporary American sitcom. Wow, that's incredible. Some of her research interests include sitcom, comedy, feminism, gender, representation, mental illness, autism, and genre. Wow. I think after hearing all of her credentials, I don't need to say this, but Lucy is incredibly brilliant, and I so enjoy talking to her. This is our first conversation of, I'm sure, many, and I really think you will enjoy her insights into not only Seinfeld and Elaine, but other topics that come up within the world of sitcoms and feminism and, everything that she brings to the table. So please enjoy this episode, my conversation with Lucy Rivers. Hi, Lucy. Thank you so much for being on Hot and Heavy.
Oh, I'm so pleased to be here. I'm thrilled. I'm really, really pleased. I can't wait to talk all about this.
Good. I'm so excited. Now, I first heard you on the Spinster Life podcast, which is an incredible podcast. I've promoted it on my show as well. I was fortunate to do an episode of that podcast, and it's so incredibly cool. But I really loved what you had to say about, you spoke on that podcast about, the women in sitcoms and kind of the history of that. And that's what your background's in, what you're studying. So it's super fascinating to hear, I just ramble on every week about my thoughts and my sort of, from my point of view as a comedian, as an actor who just looks up to so many of these women. But the reason I wanted to have you on, of course, is because of all that insight that you have. And so I'm so excited to get into this with you. First of all, can you tell our listeners kind of your history with Seinfeld? Just spoiler alert, you're not the hugest fan.
No, I'm not. I think I just missed the boat on it when it was coming out. I was living abroad, so I wasn't really getting it as it came out. And I really feel like something like Seinfeld, something that caught the zeitgeist to that degree, you kind of had to be in that wave to really appreciate it and to connect with it on a deep level. So, yeah, I am essentially new to Seinfeld. I am coming at it with fresh analytical academic eyes, which I can't entirely turn off
Sure.
because of where I'm at. But yeah, so I've watched a good handful of episodes now, and now most recently this one.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm very fresh to it. I'm very, very fresh to it.
I know what you're talking about because there are things in, in pop culture, whatever you want to call it, where if you don't get into it at the time, at a certain time, not only, like I believe, even if you got into a certain thing, like, so just to give an example, my daughter is 12 and a half, and within the last year, she's gotten really into Friends, and I think that show, I mean, I love Friends too. There's this dumb like rivalry between like Seinfeld. You can't like Friends if you like Seinfeld. It's like this stupid thing that's out there. But anyway, so I just think it's kind of this combination of like maybe the time in the culture, maybe the hype around a show, and then also like where you are emotionally or maturity wise, to be able to connect to a
Oh,
show. So yeah, sometimes it's
absolutely.
like it has to be that like perfect storm to really get
I
into a show.
yeah. Yeah, I agree. And actually, Friends is a great example of it because there are so many people who did not get to watch it as it was airing, who are
Right.
now rediscovering it with Netflix and everything. And they're saying that it's terrible and they can't get into it at all. And it's like, I
Right.
think you just missed the boat on it, I'm afraid.
Absolutely.
Actually, but like what you said, to do with it having possibly something to do with age and where you are emotionally and maturity level and stuff, that kind of really is interesting because I was watching it when I was, like 12.
Yeah.
And for your daughter to be watching it at 12 and really enjoying it at 12, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Maybe
it is. I mean,
that's
I
really interesting.
was I was so it was 94 when it came out. So I was like starting my 11th grade. So I was a junior in high school. And granted, that was such a different time. I mean, if a show was popular, that's all you heard about. There weren't 8 billion shows
Right.
to choose from like there seems to be now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is interesting, and it's so funny. My daughter asked me the other day because I've mentioned it on my show. My kids don't love Seinfeld. I mean, they've gotten into certain things like my daughter totally gets why I love Elaine and she likes Elaine, but it's more boring to them, it's not the sort of set up punchline
Yeah.
like a Friends, like that formula.
Mhm.
And it is a different type of show. I mean it's 30 something years old, but I mean, I think she asked me the other day, which I thought was really insightful. She was like, she's like, Seinfeld, is it like blowing up like Friends did? Because Friends had this like renaissance, like this total like uh, new crop of new generation of fans. When they did
Mm.
that HBO reunion, they were talking about how like, my goodness, like now this younger generation's really getting into it. And I was
Yeah.
like, I don't think so. I'm like, yeah, I just don't think Seinfeld hits the same way. Um,
No.
but
Yeah.
so that's just in itself is interesting.
It is.
I'm not precious about, I mean, it's again, one of my favorite sitcoms of all time. I have my reasons for loving it, but I'm never that person that's like trying to push it on people and trying to convince people that they should like it. I'm just kind of like,
Mm.
I observe and I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting.
Mm.
All right. So to get into what we're talking about. So the reason I chose this episode, so listeners, Lucy and I had kind of been going back and forth about, when we wanted to chat, what we wanted to chat about. And we definitely wanted to do episode specific discussions. And the reason I chose this one, because I really think the display of not only Elaine's feminism, it's so compelling, but just the fact that for a network sitcom in the 1990s to be so brazenly talking about an issue that is so polarizing, so like it's like one of those things you just don't talk about, in public, in kind of a casual conversation. So for me, I remember seeing this episode when it aired and just, it hits me more now, but like at the
Mm,
time, just going like, this is crazy that they're so openly talking
yeah.
about that. Because even like saying the word abortion, I feel was
Mhm.
revolutionary at the time. Like you just did not hear, especially not in a sitcom,
Yeah.
maybe in a drama, maybe in some kind of, um, I could see in maybe like an LA Law or some kind of like,
Yeah.
90s drama at the time. But this was in fact super rare, and again, for the female lead of the show to have a very staunch view about it,
Yeah.
that was just really revolutionary.
I think that is, yeah, that stands out. I think that really does stand out because she is really strong in her position on it. And I think that sets it apart a little bit from the precursors because abortion has come up in some earlier sitcom. I believe, was it the one that came, the spin off from Mary Tyler Moore's show?
Okay.
I believe it came up.
Was that Rhoda?
Very, and
Forgive
yes,
me.
yes,
Okay.
Rhoda.
Okay.
Yes, I think it came up in Rhoda.
Oh yes. Okay.
But it was like, but that was like a real watershed moment. But again, it was probably a little bit hush hush. I doubt they said abortion. I'm sure they didn't say that.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so as you're saying, really revolutionary, especially because you can see how strong her feelings are about it. I think, yeah, once I watched this one, I could definitely see why you chose it for us to talk about. Um, I could certainly understand. And I think it was a great choice. It was definitely a great choice for the first one for us to talk about. Again, I've watched other ones, but I do feel like this one stands out more than some of the other ones I've watched. Um, I think in terms of my sort of like my feelings about like the series generally,
Mm-hmm.
um, I reckon that one of the reasons I've been a bit unsure of it and it's not been a top sitcom of mine is probably down to its structure and presentation ultimately. It's only recently that I've been able to put proper voice to this idea,
Sure.
just thanks to the book chapter that I have finished early this year. That's going to be included in a collection of edited chapters on Netflix sitcom BoJack Horseman, actually.
Okay.
And when I was looking at BoJack, I researched some really interesting ideas around what makes some sitcoms feel sort of deeper and more warm in their tone, and what makes other ones sort of like Seinfeld feel cooler and more sleek in their tone.
Sure.
So, and basically what this boils down to is postmodernism.
Okay.
And so postmodernism and the movement that's now emerging from following on from that, which is namely metamodernism. Lots of other words, floating around for what comes after postmodernism, but that's kind of the one that I'm sticking to. And
Okay.
again, I don't want to get too technical with this because I don't want to be boring, but
No, I love it. I mean, I love it. Go in deep. I like it.
but
Say that word again, though. I'm
basically
sorry. What was the term you used for after postmodernism?
metamodernism. And this is
Metamodern. Okay.
meta, not in the kind of sense of, oh, that's so meta. It's actually
Right.
from the Greek word metaxis, which means like between and through and stuff
Oh,
as well.
cool. Oh, very
So
cool.
it's a really interesting like way the words come about. But anyway,
Mhm.
postmodern sitcoms essentially are characterized by cynical detachment, deconstruction of everything from society to just ideas, parody, satire, and as a brilliant duo of authors put it, Rustad and Schwind. I'll include that so that you can like maybe put some of these
Definitely.
references in
Yes,
because it's
please.
really interesting. As they put it, laughing at the butt of the joke as opposed to kind of laughing with,
Gotcha.
which has kind of happened since, I think.
Hmm.
Um, Another great critic actually perfectly describes the way The Simpsons is a perfect example of a postmodern sitcom,
Okay.
because everything resets like week after week. Like no matter what happens,
Sure.
house can be burnt down. One week, the next it's fine as always. It's just stood there again as always. No
Yeah.
matter what happens in the episode, Homer will be working at the plant the next time you tune in.
Yeah. There's like a reset every time.
It's
Yeah.
like a reset. So no
Yeah.
matter what gets torn down, criticized, or deconstructed in the episode, there's this kind of almost apathetic helplessness created because nothing's ever going to change. It'll just be
Yeah.
reset. you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
that's kind of the feel of postmodern stuff. And I read about Seinfeld in particular as being an example of this cool postmodern type of show, very slick, very funny, and prior to the change and warmer tone that metamodernism brings in. Because uniquely, Seinfeld does stand out against other sitcoms, even of the 90s,
Right.
which captured that flavor of the 90s, the Friends, the Frasers, Will and
Yes.
Grace, even Simpsons, because it purposefully rejects a lot of the things that other sitcoms are normally doing to try and secure their audience. So
Totally.
yeah, it's cutting out the romance,
Mm-hmm.
it's avoiding progression in the characters' lives to a large degree. It's even like keeping the relationships really stale with one another. It almost kind of seems like they're just this bunch of neurotic people who are kind of been forced together by coincidence or circumstance more than they are like bosom buddies, like friends.
Totally. Totally. Just to interject a little bit. Yeah. I mean, so famously, Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld, the creators of this show, um, their motto for it was no hugging, no learning. They knew from the jump that they did not want this to feel like another show, like what you're talking about, those structures. And it was intentional because they didn't like sitcoms. They themselves didn't watch TV. It's very interesting, in fact, and sort of what I credit that my man. I'm just always a fan in general, whatever artist it is. I'm fans of just the fearlessness of people.
Oh, absolutely. That is totally fearless. And to have like gone out with it ready with that sort of, nope, we're not going to be this, you
Yes.
know?
And these were two guys who were basically nobodies. I mean, Larry David
Yeah.
certainly was a nobody at that point. Jerry was a somebody, but didn't have a lot of power. He was a stand-up. And so, but they just knew like, hey, they had such confidence in the fact that they're
Mm,
like, we know funny.
mm,
And we know what we like, and we're
yeah.
pretty confident in what we find humorous and our approach. I mean, and they fully admit, like, they attribute a lot of that to being young and inexperienced,
Yeah.
and just
Of
kind of
course.
being like, this kind of whatever attitude about it.
Mm,
But yeah, that was so intentional on their part, only because, like I said, they hated watching TV. They're like, we don't like any of
mm.
these sitcoms, so like we're just going to make something that we would want to watch, and we
Yeah.
don't want that to be super yeah, like huggy touchy feely,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
even the sitcoms of that time, which again, I'm not criticizing it because I watched like everything,
Mm,
but like
yeah.
every sitcom eventually would have on a very special episode of blah blah blah, like it would always have these dramatic moments, even in Friends, because of the romances and stuff, like
Yes.
um but and so they were very like, we don't want this to feel like that in the least. They're in the beginning, the network was really pushing for a romantic storyline between Elaine and
Mhm.
Jerry,
I love
which
it. I love that they stood the ground with it. I love
yeah,
that.
yeah. So I think we wouldn't have Seinfeld if they had listened to that advice, or sort of gave into that sort of pressure from the network. And they were like, we know nothing, but we know this.
Yeah. And that's really interesting because it actually sounds super similar to something else that was, heralded as completely revolutionary when they made it for sitcom. When The Office was made in the UK, when Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant made it, they were like, yeah, we're just not going to do this. We're going to do it this way. It's going to be super uncomfortable and really tough to watch, and it's going to be great. And it was really revolutionary for what it was. So it's very like that. It's
I
really interesting.
It is. I mean, and I I love because I love The Office as well.
Mm,
And I've listened to a couple podcasts about The Office, and I loved that I mean, I don't think it's very surprising. Greg Daniels, the creator of The American Office,
Hmm.
was a huge Seinfeld fan, like loved that
Yep.
sitcom. And so he would always kind of look to the story of how Seinfeld, started out. And he saw a lot of parallels with it because just like Seinfeld in the beginning, The Office didn't know
Yeah,
it was
it
coming back. There was, yeah, it was
didn't know it was
very
coming
shaky.
back. Very shaky start.
Oh, and to the point where it was like they were getting like two episodes at a time. Like they didn't know
Yeah,
they wouldn't
really
sign for a new, yeah,
shaky.
super shaky. But
Which does surprise me because of because of the success of the UK office. I am surprised about how experimental and how much it
right,
was a push for American TV to take it on. But I
yeah,
think it was just because it was still so new as an idea, and it was leaning into that discomfort, which is a lot more British humor in general. So
exactly. Well,
I
that was,
think,
I think, the big disconnect because of
yeah.
other attempts at making British,
Mm.
whatever, redesigning a British type
Yeah,
show for American
they tend
audience.
to bomb hard. They do
Very
tend to
hard,
bomb
very hard.
hard.
The best, I mean, I remember, so my parents, when the Volley episode of The Office came out,
Mm.
it was written by Mindy Kaling. I mean, I was excited for it because I'm like the Volley. I mean, I grew up celebrating the Volley, and it was just like really
Yeah.
cool. And so you'd see the commercials for it, and so my parents had heard about it, and I think even there was like just a lot of hype around that episode,
Mm.
and I think I even went to their house to watch it with them, and they had never seen an episode of The Office,
Right.
and so I mean, they were like, what is this? They're expecting a laugh track. They're expecting, I didn't, and it didn't even occur to me to warn them because I had been watching The Office and I'm just
No.
like, I loved it. And I mean, I'm sitting there laughing. I think it's great and just, relating to so much of it. And my
Yeah.
parents were like, I don't get it. Like I just didn't even think about structurally that it was so
Yeah.
different to them, the
Such a
awkwardness.
departure.
I mean, and
Yeah.
and I listened to the Office Ladies podcast with Angela Kinsey
Love
and
it.
Jennifer Jennifer Fisher. Yeah, I know, me
Love
too.
it.
I love it too. And I love even how they talk about, especially Angela, I feel like her like older relatives or grandmother and stuff, like
Yeah.
they're always like they hate the awkwardness. Like it's too uncomfortable to
Yeah.
watch. And I just think like I love this term. I think it was Greg Daniels who talked about once they finally broke through, it was really the younger generation who said this show
Mhm.
is something. And he says, there's always a generational turning of the page. And I
Yeah.
loved that term because I feel
That's a
like
great one. Yeah.
that is what happens.
Totally.
It's not everyone's gonna love it, but there's also this like, and how many now shows have this structure of documentary
Mm.
style, mockumentary style, you know, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
so cool to
Such a
see
good one.
like where things, where things do change and the acceptance of
Exactly.
it, the resistance initially, and then the acceptance.
Yeah. I would certainly say that The Office is one of the things that probably started as a little bit more postmodern just because it was so because of the structure and because it was so cynical with exposing these things and stuff, but just almost purely through Jim and Pam, I think. It like
Yes.
it completely evolves, it's completely metamodern very quickly, I would say. And it's so interesting because when you compare Seinfeld to something like The Office or Parks and Rec, for instance,
Yes. Yes. Love that
because
show.
Parks and Recreation, the bonds are extremely deep and involved.
Mm-hmm.
There's the huge amounts of character progression and lots of self work as well by the characters.
Yes. Yes.
There's and far from that kind of sense of like hopelessness or pointlessness or the minutiae of the days or whatever. It's these characters that want to and in fact do enact positive change in their daily lives, like through their jobs, and there's like so much optimism and stuff with it. It's just this sense is like this sense of hope and purpose sprinkled in with moments of cynicism and, oh, this is kind of realistically difficult, isn't it? But
Right.
it's this kind of mixture of things that makes something really metamodern, I think, because it's almost like it sort of swings between being quite cynical and being really optimistic in a
Yeah.
way, and that's kind of what makes something more metamodern. And I think that yeah, it's such an interesting contrast when you look at stuff like Seinfeld, because that was such a unique and really standout moment of postmodern sitcoms, because it really
Totally.
stood out. It stood out even amongst postmodern sitcoms. It was that different, I think.
And I think maybe that's, I just thought of this back to my daughter's question, like, oh, has Seinfeld blown up with the younger people? And I'm like, maybe it's because, to your point, I think Greg Daniels and Mike Schur have created such an interesting approach to sitcoms. Like you were saying, I mean, there's these moments of total farce, there's moments of total
Mm,
cynicism, but then they do the saccharine moments
yeah,
so well,
so well.
one of my
Yeah.
favorite episodes of Parks and Rec, and I'm sorry listeners, we will get to Seinfeld
We
momentarily,
will, we will,
um
we will.
but when the littlest park, or the smallest park, where
Oh my gosh, I knew you were going to say this one.
right, yeah, I
I
mean,
knew you were
it
going to
was
say
so
it.
during the pandemic. I feel like just to feel good, my husband and I,
Mhm.
like my husband would just have it on like every night. I think we watched that for like at least 3 months. We would just like need to watch it because, the whole episode, Leslie's being like so insufferable towards Ben, and
Mm,
but it's done in such a way where you get it,
yeah.
and you also see Ben struggle. And there's all these
Mm,
hilarious moments within, like
so
it's
funny.
to me, how it turns on a dime is just the brilliance of, again,
Absolutely.
Mike Schur and the writers of that show, and these people who can just create these moments where in 1 minute you're laughing so hard and then the next minute you're like
Mm,
a puddle when
yeah.
Ben finally says, no, I don't want this either, and oh my gosh,
Mm,
like it is one of the,
it's so
yeah, it's
good. It's
so
so
good,
good.
so well done. It's
And
like,
it's that it's that mixture, isn't it, of the funny and the sincerity,
yeah,
which is so unique. And it's just, yeah, it's brilliant. And I think you're right. I think what you were suggesting is that because younger viewers can't get into Seinfeld because they don't have that
no,
coziness.
nothing.
There's none of that coziness to hold on to. There's
Yeah,
like
it's the exact opposite. Like, it's like, let's show the
yeah,
worst in all of these characters always, and
yeah,
we're not going to soften it. We're not going to show the redeeming quality at the end. No, we're not going to show
yeah.
Michael Scott at the end of the Halloween episode with the
Oh,
kids. You know what I mean?
I love that moment.
I love that
Yeah,
moment too, and
it's
and
amazing.
Greg
That's
Daniels
like
was
the
so
first moment. Yeah, it's like the first
right.
moment that you start to really like that character because you see that. Yeah, it's
He's
great.
such an idiot the whole time. He's got to fire someone that episode, and he's just doing everything wrong. And I think, back to Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant,
Mm,
they, to me, I mean, what, I don't know, I admire them so much. Like, I love that they had the sensibility to, they're, of course, as executive producers on the US version, but they've been pretty vocal about the fact that, like, we sort of, we gave our 2 cents, like, hey, this is not the same sensibility as British comedy. So,
hmm.
in, I feel like in America, Michael Scott wouldn't get this much of a hall pass,
No.
so you show these qualities about him, the abhorrent qualities about him, but make
Mm,
him a good salesman. Show
yeah,
in every episode, show some humanity, show some
yeah,
vulnerability. And because I think that's human nature, right? So it's like, it's not so black
totally.
and white. But okay, sorry, Lucy, we need to
Anyway,
get back on track. Okay,
we
but I
do need
love
to get
all of
back on
this.
track.
I'm so here for it. But let's get into the couch episode. So,
Yes.
Elaine, like we touched on, the feminism, she is
Hmm.
so unapologetic about her stance on abortion.
Absolutely.
Getting into the nitty gritty, that
Hmm.
first scene, but pre-abortion talk, but that first
Yes.
scene where she sees, his name's Carl, the delivery guy, and we
Yes,
see, and
Carl.
I kind of have these little terms that I've used on my show, and so this one is a display of flirty Elaine, one of my favorite
Flirty
versions of Elaine,
Lane.
when she first sees
Yes.
him. And what are your thoughts on that scene where when she first spots Carl?
I thought it was great. I thought it was really strong, start for her in this episode. I loved it. She was funny, she was flirty, she was like witty and really just like really sexual and self-confident as she
Yes.
expresses her interest in this guy, and then how she comes back and she's like retelling about how she asked him out. And that just reminded me of the way women tell each other like about their exploits a little bit, like
Yeah.
just which really underlined just how off the table anything between her and Jerry was, really. But it
Right.
was as if she was just chatting to her girlfriends. But I do think it was a shame that Jerry's reaction kind of made out that her joke, which was so funny as well, like I do now,
Right.
I do,
Right.
I
Right.
do date them now. Yeah, I thought that was really funny. But
Yeah.
he made out that it was like gross or lame, which kind of took
Totally.
away from her a little. I think I just thought that it was like cutting her down. I was like, no, that was really charming and funny. She was
Yeah.
being great.
I,
So
it's so funny you say that. I think I agree, but I also think it would have been really out of character for Jerry to be like, that was great. He wouldn't
it's
do that.
true. He isn't
That's the
impressed
relationship.
easily. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. They all cut each other down all the time.
they
And
do.
I've said this before on the show too. I love that Elaine's an equal opportunity. I mean, she's an equal participant in both
That's
doing
true.
the cutting down and getting cut down. And
Yeah,
I think
that's
that
true.
that's a big part of why the character, I love the character so much, is because her plots for the most part are pretty interchangeable with the guys, save for the gender of the love interest or
Mm.
something.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, back to that scene, when I talk about flirty Elaine, I think another thing that I responded to a lot when I was young watching this show was, again, her just the unapologetic way she's not some kind of little meek damsel, I'm going to wait for the guy to come to me, that sort of take charge.
Yeah,
um I that was, she owns her own femininity and her sexuality, and it's been shown quite a bit on the show. Like, she's
yeah.
from the get-go, I mean, from even the early episodes with Elaine on, she's very kind of like, she's the one taking charge, and she has
Yeah.
no problem with that.
And she doesn't play games. She doesn't try to, just get someone to come to her in some kind of way.
Right.
There's none of that game playing stuff, which again, I think outlines her maturity on a level that it kind of gets contrasted by Jerry's, because he said, no games, then how do you know who's winning? And I was like, oh my God, what? Like,
I know.
that
I
was such a
know.
that was such a 90s joke though. That's like a completely 90s guy based joke though, isn't it? It's like
Yes.
completely just of the time,
And he
really.
makes,
So
and at even, I think he's in his like late 60s now, he still makes these jokes. It's like, oh my gosh.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
just that old sensibility. But again, it's very on track, on brand for the character.
Yes.
So I but I like that she's that representation of, it's you spoke so eloquently on the Spencer Life podcast. Another thing I really loved was when you were talking about those categories that women
Oh, of
were
women,
put
yes.
into. Could you speak
Hmm.
to that really quickly? Just those.
Yeah, sure. So this was actually on my master's. That was when I looked at women in sitcom really specifically. I have since moved on to, unlike most of my work now, it's actually looking at mental health. It's looking
Okay.
at mental illnesses in sitcoms. That's why I was looking at BoJack and everything, obviously.
Right, right.
But obviously still extremely interested in women in sitcom though. But yeah, so when I did my master's work, I basically identified three really enduring modes of representation in sitcoms, and this was starting from I Love Lucy right up to the present, which at the time was the Big Bang Theory. I think I chose. So that was sort of analyzing and noticing the fact that they existed right back at the beginning with I Love Lucy, and all three modes were still active and present in the Big Bang Theory in the present. So
Mm,
the first is I termed the Killjoy.
right.
So this is a character that basically exists to ruin the guy's fun.
Yep.
they'll often be a wife or a mother, or
Yes.
at the very least they'll be like a partner. They basically are kind of like an obstacle, and I think some really good examples might include Monica. She's a bit of a killjoy
Totally.
character. So that's kind of like a general example. Oh, Marge Simpson is like a killjoy character. Then the second mode is called the grotesque. So this is a character that really pretty much exists to be mocked, visually,
Hmm.
or due to their, um, I guess, also sort of due to their traits in general. For instance, Liz Lemon of 30 Rock is a pretty good grotesque idea. And then finally, the Ditz, which I kind of term to be a character that's beautiful, or at least attractive somehow, but very shallow in their character, often paired with things like silliness or drinking to excess, or
Right.
all these kinds of things. So yeah, so there was all the way back through. I made it way too wide. Like, I shouldn't have tried to go I Love Lucy all the way to the present. I definitely made a mistake there. But there were sort of these elements in I Love Lucy, and right up to the Big Bang Theory, all three existed. The Killjoy was Bernadette's character in the Big Bang Theory.
Hmm.
The grotesque was obviously Amy Farrah Fowler, which
Sure.
was unhappily and very, like, made me so unhappy and sad. And finally, the Ditz would have been Penny.
When I was listening to you laying that out on the Spinster Life podcast, my brain was like firing with like all these different characters I was thinking about. And I remember even bringing it up later to like at the family dinner table. It's so funny. Like, my daughter seems to be into, like, she really likes discussing this kind of thing. Like, it makes me so happy. She's gotten into Christopher Guest movies recently, and
Oh,
she's getting like very nuanced humor, which just is, it warms my heart. But
oh, that's great.
but she likes to talk about like breaking down, comedy and
Mm.
the different types and stuff like that. But anyway, um, but yeah, I mean, I just found that like it was just like a like my head exploding moment, because so like one of my first favorite sitcoms when I was little and I would watch it in syndication was Three's Company. So when you were
Ah.
talking about, that those modes for all the female characters, I was like, well, obviously Chrissy is the ditz, Janet's the killjoy. But at times the grotesque too. Janet kind of straddled that, unfortunately, because I love Janet. Yeah, I just absolutely love that assessment. And then but I also feel like with Elaine, she can kind of span all of that. So I know you haven't seen a
Totally.
lot of the episodes, but I think, at the time I certainly didn't recognize it, but all I knew was, as a whatever 12 to 20-year-old woman, 12-year-old girl to 20-year-old woman watching the show, I just knew I loved Elaine. I just knew it felt
Mhm.
different. It felt like something I hadn't seen before. I loved so many things about her. And I think because she does throughout the series, at times she is like the ditzy one, or the
Mm.
desirable one. Then
Yeah,
she's definitely grotesque at certain points, where you
completely.
rip on
I get,
something about
yeah.
her appearance. Um, and then also the killjoy. I mean, the
Hmm.
killjoy, I feel, interestingly enough, even given that she's the only female in the principal cast,
Mm.
she's not that as much. And I think that's a big part of, I give credit to, again, Larry David,
Yeah.
for the direction he gave the writers, because they were having trouble in the beginning. They didn't know how to write her. And
Mm.
they
Mm.
kept getting hung up on the fact, and that, keep in mind, in the beginning it was all male writers, not a big
Of
surprise.
course.
But uh they believed in Julie Louis-Dreyfus's talent. They knew they wanted her on the show. They just loved this character, and this type of character to have on the show, this ex-girlfriend who's still, like an equal. So Larry David gave the direction: write her like a man. Don't
Yeah.
think about it, and at first it makes me cringe, but at the same time it's like, well, I think that's the language that was needed at that time
At the
for that
time,
room
yes.
of writers to get
Yes.
out of their heads, because they're like, well, we have to make it a female issue or a female
Yes.
plot. But given that, and I like, in a lot of times when I'm covering episodes, I will point out, like, this could have easily, like, Elaine's storyline could have easily been a George storyline.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
she, and so she, and Julie Louis Dreyfus too, as totally fearless about looking unattractive, looking foolish. I mean, the Elaine
Mhm.
dance, she admits to this day, is one of the most embarrassing things she's ever had to do. But she's like, you do it for comedy. You do it. Like, you don't
Yeah.
think about it. Don't be afraid to look like a fool for the sake of the comedy, which is like my
Yeah.
creed, really, when I'm trying, when I'm performing at all.
I think you're exactly right. I think that partly because, as you say, they kind of had the direction to write her as if she wasn't a woman. That immediately freed them from these boxes that women in sitcom get put into.
Right.
So instantly, she is more likely to just veer between the boxes or whatever rather than
Yes.
be stuck into one, because that's what a male character is more likely to do in a
They can do
sitcom,
anything. Right.
because they can
Exactly.
do anything. So, yeah, I think it's a good assessment and it's completely right. That's why she's progressive, because she isn't being limited by
Right.
these kinds of portrayals.
Right. And that moment in that writer's room, because it was her bringing it to the attention of Larry and Jerry and just going like, give me more to do. So that's what's been so
Mm-hmm.
interesting watching this from the beginning, and doing this rewatch from that point, because you see them struggling with her
Mm-hmm.
storylines, and her giving it her all as an actress to sort of make something out of these piddly storylines for the most part. um
Yeah.
but it was her, Julie Louis-Dreyfus, in tears, going into the writer's room saying, give me more. I can do more. Please, just,
Mm-hmm.
just, and they took that very seriously. And Larry David and Julie Louis-Dreyfus had a relationship. They were on Saturday Night Live together for a brief amount of
Mm.
time. And so, I think that's a testament to them as well. Sounds like I'm giving credit for something they should have done. But again, given the time, given the tone of whatever, the boys club and all that stuff at that period of time, but they
Mm.
immediately, that's when they were like, okay, we got to make a change. And that's when they, Larry David sort of went in with that speech to the writers and said, don't think of her as a female character. Just think of her as one of the writer like a man. And
Yeah.
she'll be able to handle it. She can do it, so
Yeah.
really
Because
interesting.
I think you're right, because again, there isn't much that you can say. If you look at it now, there isn't really much that you can say is progressive about a character getting better just because she got written like a man.
No. Yeah.
Because obviously, and you can see it in the series itself. The way that they interact and everything, she is essentially one of the guys,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of how it is a lot of the time. You can see that. But as you say, at that time, in that place, when there was not the proper representation around, when there was not the proper um, guidance for how to try and do that, really,
Right.
without them, just fitting into a box. And of course, Seinfeld being an out of the box thing to begin with, that would have
Right.
been part of why they struggled, I think, to fit her in.
Exactly. And so and I also don't want to say like they did this with the intention of revolutionizing female characters. It's like, no, they listened to their
Yeah.
their female actor on the show,
Mm.
who was brave enough to stand up to them and say, hey, listen, I'm not here to sort of do these little side storylines that don't have a
Yeah.
lot of substance, because I'm capable of more. So there's so many
Mm.
elements of it that I love. She stands up for herself, because also sometimes I think there's an overcorrection I've seen, in fact, more recently with sitcoms or shows where
Mm-hmm.
the women can do no wrong almost. And I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that either, that approach, because I love that Elaine
Ah. Mm.
gets a pie in the face just as much as the guys do. Like, not all of her ideas, or
Mm.
approaches, or whatever her story,
Yeah.
her plot is, sometimes it backfires in her face because it was a dumb decision. But that's something they would give a man too, so it's like sometimes I don't like the overcorrection of like,
Yeah.
well, we can't show that women
Yes.
make, that, I don't know, I think there's sometimes, and I think with the
Yes.
intent of not being insensitive, but at the same time I'm like, well, that's not a fully formed character either.
Yes, it's not a fully realized female character if they don't have flaws. Yeah, yeah, we could easily talk about that easily, couldn't we? But no, so I think in onto the meat of the episode, in the sense of the women's rights. So we see Elaine talking about boycotting a pizza place due to the owner's funding of anti-abortion outfits and such. And supposedly to highlight the unreasonable of this position, like, because there's no obvious link between pizza and women's rights, so why would you make a stand on this? Jerry sort of calls over their present owner of the restaurant they're currently in, Poppy, to find out his position on the issue particularly, like just to send it up and everything. So, and Poppy's his am I saying that right, Poppy? Because
yeah, Poppy,
Poppy,
yeah. I'm saying it with my Midwestern accent. So
yeah,
you say it with your lovely British accent.
That would be Pappy, I think. I said it, but anyway, he says, there's no intelligent person could be anything but pro-life, and that's quite an odious moment, obviously. But Elaine asserts that she thinks very differently, and he asks, what gives her the right to do that? A crazy thing for someone to actually say, but this is obviously down to the forced writing to get to the punchline, to the point that this is about women's rights. As yes. Elaine righteously declares, the Supreme Court gives me the right to do that.
Right.
So I think it's notable rather, that the show underlines the division on the issue by having someone agree with Poppy, as well as Elaine and others who, like her, also agree and, storm out of the restaurant in protest. But I think it's also notable that all those that speak up are women.
Yes.
When in reality, it is men who are in the powerful positions and speak out the most rabidly against abortion.
Right.
So the fact that no male, apart from Poppy, has an opinion on this is interesting.
Even Jerry doesn't say
even Jerry. Yeah, you never know his opinion on it at all.
Exactly.
Even it almost could give you the impression to a viewer that this really is an issue just between women with really strongly opposing views, when in truth it's about the fight for control over women's bodies,
isn't it? Yeah, exactly.
So I thought that was interesting, the way that they do that. I think it's also interesting that the next day Jerry is retelling the tale of the night before to George.
Yes.
And he's just telling it with such glee, and then casually leaning back and just sort of proudly saying it was pretty much all my fault. But again, it's like he has no stake in this race, but he's just so proud of the mess he created. It was so funny.
It goes back to just, again, the shallowness of these people, because
totally.
Ultimately Jerry only brings it up because he doesn't want to eat at Poppy's. So what you probably don't know from before, there was a previous episode where he sees Poppy not wash his hands after going to the bathroom.
Oh yes, no, I've seen. Yes,
so that's his sort of.
I didn't realize it was the same place. Okay,
yes. So that's why, he's sort of like, I'm not really thrilled about being here. And Jerry's such a neat freak, kind of a germaphobe. So, even the shaking hands.
So he just stirs up this.
So that's it. That's the whole reason. He doesn't want to eat at Poppy's. He's still grossed out by what happened before. And yeah, he's just a shit starter. I mean, even moving forward with asking Elaine, there's no reason to know if this man that she's just head over heels and so giddy about, what is his stand on abortion? It's like, what the hell, Jerry? Why are you
he's just a niggler. He's just
absolutely.
But I will say that it was around about this point in watching the episode, I really wasn't enjoying the episode too much.
Sure.
I wasn't loving it, because you see Elaine totally loving this new guy, and then Jerry coming in with his, but what is his stance, kind of thing. And obviously, it sort of made me feel like she was just being set up, because obviously you can already see where the arc's going. It's going to be that she's disappointed by a dreaming guy, which she is, and ultimately this places her kind of in the butt of the joke type of situation. And
right.
I guess I felt like the real issue of women's rights felt so undercut at that point to her in the episode, because I was not enjoying it, because I couldn't see where it was going to go. And comedy is itself such a political act, because laughter at societal norms and reality is, that's inherently a way to question, undermine, even illuminate the structures we live in, and that we're confined by.
Totally.
So I thought to myself, it can be a form of release, like a catharsis, just to recognize these things in humor, but it can also be an attempt to truly highlight inequity and injustice. And I wasn't feeling that the tone was getting quite right for that.
You're not going to get
So
that from Seinfeld.
no,
You're not going to get that.
Not generally. No, not
Yeah.
generally. I get, but like when the subject matter is just so hugely political, socially, nationally, even personally,
Yeah.
as women's rights, it did give me some discomfort to watch the arc coming out in a way that was going to tear Elaine down. Yeah. Because I thought if there's any situation where maybe you don't make her the butt of the joke, maybe it's just this one, where she's not technically just one of the guys, because all the men around got to be comfortable and overtly destructive forces around her in the episode.
Yes.
So at that point, if anything, I was impressed, because I thought that as a commentary on how women are like simultaneously victimized and oppressed in the issue, I thought it was kind of genius in a way. At that point in the episode, I thought, well, that's sort of genius.
It's a theme in this show where again, it's become more, it's like the light has been shown on it more with this rewatch that I'm doing, how much Elaine gets screwed over by these idiot friends like this.
Yes,
in a lot of the interviews that Julie Louis-Dreyfus gives about, Elaine and the character. So I own the DVDs, and a lot of times I'll have the little notes. They're called Notes About Nothing, with these little kind of factoids that come up during the episode. And so sometimes I'll have quotes, by the actors in various interviews. And the theme of Julie Louis-Dreyfus's assessment of Elaine is always just like, oh my gosh, why is she hanging out with these idiots? But like, this is the flaw of Elaine, that she doesn't feel like she deserves better friends, and that's so true. It's so true. But it's like, I also think like her character flaw is that like, she's kind of like them too, so like,
she's just as neurotic, so they do.
Absolutely.
She is just as neurotic in many ways.
I love what you were saying about, yes, comedy and art in general. I feel like it's such a way to bring light to such heavy issues, such as women's rights, especially abortion rights.
It's a way that's accessible to people.
Totally.
It's a way that won't, it'll gently bring it about, but it can also really harshly shine the light on things as well at the same time.
And that's the key, right? Is to make it palatable.
Exactly.
I think people get turned off if they see people.
Yeah, people don't want to watch a serious thing. They don't want to watch a serious drama about abortion, but they will watch the sitcoms. And if it comes up in those, that's at least some way to get the information there and to get the points across there.
Which is why the feminism of Leslie Knope, I think, is so brilliantly done. It's so balanced. I don't think you can put her in any of those boxes, right? Because she spans all of them.
She does, because she's a well-written character.
She's so good. Yeah, it's so amazing. But also that's where it's like a sitcom that does it so right with, hey, we'll have a fart joke, and then 5 minutes later we'll see the feminism come through on these women, but not in a way that's going to turn off the audience or make it or pivot it so hard that it's like, oh gosh, now are we watching like we're getting lectured, or it's very difficult to write that.
It is very hard to write, but I do consider the feminism depicted in Parks and Rec to be I would consider it to be very real life feminism, in the sense that most women are not going to just instantly, launch into lectures exactly. Right. But at the same time, they'll be positive and very plain in what their feelings and thoughts are about these things. And I think it's really good. I think that kind of thing is just a really great way of bringing these things to light. But so I wasn't feeling great just because of how the things were kind of coming together around Elaine. But then it all comes around once Kramer is trying to do his dry run of his own make your own pie idea with Papi, and Papi tells him, no, you can't put cucumber on this pizza.
It's a Kramer's pizza. Like, it's not a pizza
what gives you the right to choose what goes on my pizza? Yep. And he's like, well, you can't let people choose whatever toppings they want to go on the pizza. Yep. And then they even debate about at what point in the preparation and cooking process the pizza becomes a pizza.
Right.
And it's brilliant, and the point was made and made beautifully, and I thought it was the perfect close.
I think so too. That really does bring it home. And also, I didn't think of it this way until you said it, like how the indifference of the men for most of the episode is so reflective of what it is in real life.
Yeah.
And I guess I chose to focus on, like, I even though Jerry's such a shit starter and he asks about Carl and, well, what's his stand on abortion,
Mm-hmm.
and Elaine, you just see her reluctance, like, oh God, I don't
Yeah.
want to know. I'm going to assume,
I don't
I'm
want to
sure he's
know.
pro-choice. And then when she's like, I guess for me, and I remember thinking this as a teenager watching it, going like, I don't think I could be with someone, like it would be an instant turn off,
Yeah.
like total
Yeah.
deal breaker. I
Total
could
deal
never
breaker.
be
Yeah.
with someone like,
No.
there are certain issues where you can kind of, okay, we can
Yeah.
agree to disagree
Middle
on this, blah blah
ground.
blah. But yeah, there are certain
Yeah.
things where
Not
it's
that
like,
one.
so to me, I'm going, okay, Jerry's such a dumbass shit starter, but it did create the moment for her to find out
Yeah.
early on that this guy is
Yeah.
pro-life, and that like
True.
breakdown in tears, where she's like,
It's
oh, I
true.
know that I have to break up with him now. So to me,
Yes.
that example, through her arc in this episode,
Mm.
it just really showed me, like, she's not going to compromise her beliefs.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really strong aspect of it, because you could have easily mined humor out of her bending over backwards to find excuses to stay in that relationship or
Right.
something. But
Well,
no, there's
yes.
never any question. There's never any question. Once it's revealed, it's ended.
Done.
And
Yeah.
that's really strong,
Yeah.
actually, in its own way. That's exceptionally strong and really good. And also, I hope I haven't ever said it the wrong way around, but I just have to point this out because I do think that it's interesting just from a kind of like English to American sort of perspective. I it was really late before I realized what pro-choice and pro-life meant,
Oh yeah.
because I thought pro-life meant essentially pro-choice, because it's a woman's life, it's their life to
I
do with
see.
what they want and everything.
Sure.
And so I did not understand which way around it was for like a long time.
Sure.
I
Sure.
just didn't understand it, because to me both sound like the same thing. Pro-choice
Totally.
is the choice that women have. It should be their choice.
Mm-hmm.
And pro-life is it's a woman's life. It's you know
I mean,
I
you're
I
talking about,
just
yeah,
yeah.
essentially that is, you are right. And it's, again, not to get too far down this road, because again,
Mm,
I've skirted around the fact that, and I'll address it more in the podcast episode,
mm.
but like, just how incredibly heartbreaking it is to see this now, and that line
In a
of
post
the
in a
supreme,
post Roe era,
yes, yes, it
it
is.
is exceptionally difficult to watch now.
Yeah.
It is. I did have a note about it in my notes, in fact, that just to say that it's a really hard thing to watch it now, when essentially you are looking back on the 90s with nostalgia for this kind of thing, like
Yes.
to think about how much more backwards we are now in this moment in time
Yeah.
than the 90s, and we're talking about early 90s as well.
Right. And in a time, I remember
Yeah.
thinking, like, that will never change. Like, good luck with that. His line of,
Mhm.
one day we'll get enough people on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And it's just like my
Oh my
stomach.
God. That's really, I didn't even think of it at the time. Yeah. Yeah. It is really hard.
It's really hard
Really
to think
hard
about,
to
but
watch that. Yeah.
what
Yeah.
it's just one of those things where I'm like, and speaks to, again, the poignancy of the comfort we were in the
Yeah.
90s, with just
Yeah.
being, just going like, hey, I have the right to feel this way, and it's going to be like,
Mm,
it's just the thought of anything changing with Roe was like, good luck with
yeah.
that. It's not
Such
going to
a,
happen.
yeah. And I think the time actually speaks a lot to male complacency as well.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
kind of before things have really, like, it's before masculinity really starts to hit crisis.
Hmm.
So I think, and essentially it is masculinity crisis which has led to the overturning of Roe. So
Oh, for sure.
I think it's quite an interesting watch from that perspective because you can see really strong feminism, but at the same time, you kind of just see the guys still just being complacent and just being happy with their like,
Right.
with their prominent male, patriarchal positions and everything. They're still kind of just comfortable with everything. They don't really feel threatened
No.
really by Elaine.
Right.
So I think it's an interesting watch from that perspective as well. But as you
Absolutely.
say, a very, very heartbreaking watch now.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
very
And I love that scene too, where she's trying to give a really horrific example. Like a friend of mine got impregnated by like her
yeah.
troglodytic half brother.
Yes.
It's like, it's just,
Mm,
hey, these are the situations where how can you not support a
yeah.
woman to like terminate a pregnancy?
Yes.
But yeah, anyway, it's
Mhm.
heavy and hopefully gotta have hope for the
That's
future
the
of
heavy
this.
part of the hot and heavy, obviously. That was the heavy part.
Totally. Thank you, Lucy. Yes. The hot part is my throat at the moment. And then, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you wanted to like
No,
point out or any other observations?
I think I've ticked off all of the things in my notes.
Right on. Right on. I love it. Great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We will be chatting more with a few other choice episodes that
Can't wait.
I think you're going to have some great insights too. Thank you again. I absolutely could talk to you for hours and hours. In fact, I'd love to watch sitcoms with you. I think it'd be amazing.
Oh, that would be, yeah, we would have the most, I mean, we would be pausing it constantly to talk about what we think,
The
but
pause button
so
would
it would
be
take
worn down. Yes.
it would take a long time for us to marathon anything, but I
Yeah.
would be up for it.
It would be worth it. Absolutely worth it. Well, thank you so much, Lucy Rivers. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for contributing and love all your thoughts. And we will chat again.
Thank you.
Wasn't that amazing? I love Lucy so much. Oh, okay. I did it. I did it. I didn't mean to. I really didn't mean to. I know that seemed planned, but I love Lucy. And I know that's a sitcom, but that really just came out naturally. I'm cringing too. Don't worry about it. I'm cringing just as much as all of you are. Thank you so much for listening to this. Thank you so much to Lucy Rivers, and I'll see you next time.